Mississippi. Oh, water. You know this.
Hey folks, in this video we're going to cover the proper care, maintenance, and breeding of the ornamental fish that you can keep in your ponds. There's several varieties that we'll be talking about, several of the species of the goldfishes and the Japanese koi. All of those cohabitate well and get along quite well in the pond environment. So during this video we're going to talk to you and tell you how to properly feed and care and maintain for your fish. All right folks, in this segment we're going to talk about fish nutrition, in particular the types of fish foods that are available. The first thing that I look for in any fish food is something that is easily digestible, particularly in the koi varieties, which really have no stomach cavity per se. They do not have, a stomach that they ingest food, they hold it, break it down, and then it passes through the intestinal tract. The koi basically have just an elongated intestine, and all the digestion takes place within that intestine, so they're not able to break down really coarse grains or materials that if they aren't finely milled in a food variety. So one thing that I like to do is I'll take one of the kernels and I'll actually crunch it up with the spoon and even take a magnifying glass, and if I can see slithers of grains or pieces of corn or soybean or wheat in it, I don't like to feed that type of a particular food because it isn't totally digestible by the fish themselves. And if the food isn't digested, they'll pass it out right back into the pond, and during the summer when you've got a lot of higher temperatures, the water temperature's high, all that undigested food is broken down into nitrogen, and you're just fighting a battle with green water. And that's one of the first questions that I'll ask customers that come in our store is, what type of food are you feeding? And sometimes I get the atrocious answer that they're feeding some catfish food, and that's the worst type of food to feed any of your fishes. So, just get a good quality fish food, because that certainly will help eliminate a lot of problems with green water. Not only the quality of the food, but also the fact that seasonally you need to change the types of food that you're feeding. As the fish are beginning to come out of their winter hibernation period, so to speak, they're not very active during the winter, but as they come out in the spring, they certainly get a lot more active, and they seem like they're just hungry as all get out. Don't be fooled by that. You need to have a thermometer that you can keep a track of the actual water temperature. They can take food in, but unless that water temperature normally is up to at least 70 degrees, they're not able to totally and fully digest that food if you feed them on a daily basis. So don't overfeed your fish, particularly in the spring of the year when they're coming out of that hibernation stage. They want to seem overly aggressive, but keep a thermometer in the pond and just feed them every couple of days until that water temperature gets up to 70 degrees and stabilizes at 70 degrees. And at that point in time, you need to pay close attention to the labeling on the food that you buy. Now this particular product is they call it their spring and autumn diet, and that's the time that you should be feeding this particular type of food. During those time periods, your water temperature is below 70, and you're going to continue feeding your fish, once every week or so until the water temperature drops to below 50, 45, and then you can just cease altogether, because even though they might ingest it, they're not able to really digest it. So you don't want any food to be held in their stomachs. If you get a really cold freezing period that comes along, there can be some health issues if they're sitting there all winter long and they've got some undigested food that's in their intestinal tract. So be real cautious about overfeeding when you go into the fall part of the year, so that they're not left with a lot of food left in their intestines over winter. But this is a good fall winter diet. What you want to look for on the back labels, and just like you read your nutritional labels and the food stores, when you go to buy anything for your shells that you're buying, we've all been accustomed now to looking at the labeling and see what our fat content is, and see how many calories we're taking in. The same thing for the fish, but what we want to look for in the fish is the amount of protein that's in the food. Protein is the highest type of food intake to be broken down. It requires the most energy, but it also provides the most growth for the fish, and it's the most requires the most energy to digest. So if you feed a higher protein food in the fall and in the winter, those fish aren't able to break down all that protein, and it gets passed out right into the pond. So you're going to be in that same green water scummy pond cycle if you've loaded up your fish in your pond bottom with undigested food during the fall and winter. So during that fall and winter period, this particular product has 11% protein, which is great. The fish aren't in a real growing phase. They don't need a lot of high protein food, so something along this nature, is fine. Another product that you can feed during the winter is a wheat germ. Primarily, a lot of koi keepers like to feed wheat germ during the cooler temperatures, and the reason being, although this is a 20% protein, the protein from this particular product is derived from plant protein. So the plant protein is much easier to digest, and actually for the koi, a lot of the hobbyists think that a plant protein is better during the winter anyway, whereas the other fish foods, the protein source for them is fish meal, and fish meal is much more difficult to break down. So that's why a higher protein in the wheat germ isn't as bad. Although it's 20%, it's higher than the 11%, but the 11% in this particular product is from the fish meal. So digestibility is what you should be most concerned about during the fall and early spring periods of your pond health. Once you get into the warmer temperatures, you can pick back up and you can get into some of the higher protein foods, which protein is the main growth nutrient that is in all of these food products. So when you get into the summer and you've got temperatures above 70 degrees, the fish are pretty voracious, and they're coming up and they want to eat every time you walk outside. Well, you shouldn't necessarily feed them every time you go outside, but your normal feeding regimen is whatever they're going to clean up within a 5-minute period. If you go out after 5 minutes, or you stand there for 5 minutes and there's still food floating around, you should immediately net that food up, because if they don't eat it, it's going to disintegrate and fall to the bottom, and you're going to have the same problem with trying to battle that green water syndrome. So always watch it and don't overfeed your fish. It's much better to start off with smaller portions and slowly bring up the food intake as the fish are beginning to grow. And this particular product has a 32% protein intake, but one of the reasons that I like this one is it has a color enhancer added in the food. And all of these can be fed to koi as well as goldfish. Certainly some of the smaller goldfishes might have a little bit of difficulty with some of the pellets in here, but you can break them up if you like, or you can even buy some of the variety sticks, which are a little bit different composition as far as the protein content and the fish meal content, but they can be eaten by either varieties of fish. All right, this particular variety of food has a 43% protein content, which you look at the standard summer formula is 32%, and this one's a 43. You can see the fish are getting a lot more protein, and what that's going to do is it's going to do exactly what they call it's a koi growth formula. So it's really going to push the fish to grow as rapidly as possible. All of the good varieties of fish food are going to be something that's going to be highly digestible, but just don't scrimp when it comes to buying a cheap food. Make sure that you've got a good, highly digestible food. Make sure that you change food regimens when you get into the winter and the spring of the year, and don't overfeed. And I think if you'll follow, these simple rules, you're going to have a lot less problems with green water in your pond throughout the year, and it's going to be certainly easier to manage, but also it's going to help the health of your fish as well. Folks, have you talked to your fish about sex? Well, in this segment, we're going to teach you a few things that will give you some helpful hints in dealing with your fish and their sexual reproduction. Basically, the first things that you need to know is that fish are spawning, and spawning is a temperature-regulated mechanism for the fish themselves. So, in koi, in particular, spawn one time a year. And they begin the spawning process once your water temperature reaches 60 degrees. So they can begin at any point in time once water temperature has stabilized at 60 degrees, up to 70, maybe 75 degrees. Also, not only is it temperature regulated, but it can also be environmentally regulated. If you're having trouble and you want to have some babies in your pond, and you've tried several years and you've never had any offspring, there are a few little things that you can do. You can actually take the fish and move them from one pond to the other. Sometimes that movement, being in a new environment, will stimulate the koi especially to spawn. What happens when the koi in particular are spawning, the female comes along and spews eggs out, and the male fish is right behind her, putting out milt and fertilizing the eggs. Usually you can tell when the koi in particular are spawning, they're aggressively chasing the female fish around, and sometimes you'll notice them, they'll actually come up and be bumping into the female fish. There'll be several fish beside her, chasing her around, just like a bunch of men, isn't it? So they're after aggressively the female, and as she starts laying the eggs, the males are there to fertilize them. In the commercial fish industry, when they're spawning these fish in the wild, a lot of time they'll have what they call spawning mats, which these are usually mats made of like Spanish moth or some other type of material that they can lay in the pond, and the female will actually lay eggs on them. And then once the female has laid the eggs, then they'll remove them from that pond and put them in a nursery pond which has no other fish. The purposes of that is that as a population control mechanism, sometimes the koi will turn back around and actually eat a lot of the eggs that they've laid. And if you've ever had fish to spawn in your pond, there's also a lot of foaming, and it actually smells like a fishy fish pond. And that's one of the first indicators that I always get when I come to some of my ponds in the spring of the year. If I have a strong odor of fish and I look in the pond and there's a lot of foam and bubbles around the waterfall, I know that there's been an excessive amount of organic material that's been deposited in the pond, and that's what happens. You get a lot of foaming, you get a strong fishy odor. In a pond setting, the koi in particular like to lay their eggs either on the sides of the pond or on some kind of plant material. This is actually a parrot's feather which floats on the top, but you can see it has root stems that are floating down in the water, and this is one of the favorites of koi. They love any type of substrate or plant material that actually hangs down in the water. The female will come along and spray eggs all along these stems, and they'll attach. They're sticky and gelatinous, so they'll actually attach to the root stems themselves, and then the males will come along and fertilize all of the eggs. So if you want to try to get as many hatchings as possible, you would take the plant material and move it over into a separate pond or even into an aquarium that you've got a good flow of water and it's going through a filtration system. The parrot's feather, water hyacinth, any plant that has roots that hang down in the water is a favorite for the koi. If you don't have any of the plant material like that, you can use something like these filter pads. You can just lean them up against the side of the pond, maybe take a brick or something to hold them in place, and the female again will come along and deposit the eggs. And it's going to be quite obvious when you pick this up and look. You're going to see it's just going to be covered, I mean almost solid with just spots of little small, circular eggs that are going to be covering the entire filter media. So if you take the media and you move it over into another pond or something that doesn't have any other fish in it, you're going to get a lot of hatching from those eggs. Once the eggs have hatched, there again, or once the eggs have been laid, the hatching time is dependent on water temperature as well. If you happen to have a cool spell and the water temperature drops back in the 50s, well, it's going to take these eggs anywhere from 7 to 10 to possibly 12 days to finally mature enough for the larvae to hatch. So if you've got a cooler temperature, it's going to take longer. Conversely, if it warms back up, they can hatch as many as 4 to 5 days. So once they've hatched, you're going to have some small fry, and they're going to have a little egg yolk that's still going to be attached to their abdomen, and it's going to take them a couple of days before they finally absorb all of that yolk sac, and they're fairly free swimming. Of course, they're going to be so small, probably about 1/4 to 3/16 of an inch, but as they grow and get more active and colored, you're going to be easier to see them. But as far as the feeding of the small koi, the best thing to really feed any small fish is an egg yolk. So what I like to do is actually take an egg and boil it, and once you boil it hard, open the egg, peel away the white, and take the yellow circular egg yolk. And then I'll take the egg yolk and actually put it back in the oven and cook it till it just basically is real dry, and when you crumble it, it just turns into powder. And then you can take that egg yolk and just sprinkle it along the top of the pond or the aquarium, and the fish are consuming almost 100% protein content, and which will greatly facilitate their growth. And once you've fed them like that for a couple of weeks, you can move them into an outdoor pond if you've raised them in an aquarium, and continue feeding them with a little bit of egg yolk, but then you can come back in and start crumbling up some of the higher protein fish foods. There again, put it in a plastic bag and use a little dough roller, crunch it up real fine, and just sprinkle powder on the top of the pond. And after a couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing that they're going to respond to the food. But even if they don't eat it, you're going to be feeding a lot of the smaller microorganisms that these small fry will be able to feed upon. So even if you don't see them coming up, continue that process, because you shouldn't be putting over a couple of tablespoons at a day in the pond anyway. So after several weeks, you're going to start seeing the fish. They're going to be coming to you, and it's going to take a while to get them to a larger size where you're going to be able to handle them. But within probably 2 months, you should be able to take those fish and actually remove part of them from the pond. And this is one reason I encourage people, unless you really want to be serious about this, or you've got some other way to handle these fish when you've got excessive numbers. It's real difficult to handle, because the number of eggs that a female fish can lay on the koi side, you're going to get roughly 2,000 to 3,000 eggs per pound of female fish. So if you've got a female koi that's, let's say she's 6 pounds, she's going to lay around 12,000 eggs. Then of course, you're not going to get, but maybe 60% of those will hatch, but still 60% at 12,000, you're looking at 12, you're looking at 7,200 fry. Well, out of those 7,200, there again, you're not going to get 100% survival. So, you may end up with another, 50% of those actually grow up to be, regular size fry. So you're going to take half of the 7,200. So you're going to look at about 3,600 fish that you're actually going to be dealing with. And unless you've got a lot of area to work and spread these fish out, it's going to be difficult for you to handle these fish without having them overcrowded. But even in that amount, if you leave them in the pond and you didn't remove them and didn't put them in a separate hatchery pond, you could still end up with, you know, several hundred fish that would hatch. But out of those several hundred, by the time you pull them out and you start culling them and you look for nice color and shape and size and body conformity, you're really going to end up with just a couple of individuals out of that spawn that you really want to keep. So now you're left with 100 or so fish that you're going to have to do something with. And you can't leave them in your pond because the pond's going to become overcrowded. You're going to have a problem with water quality, green water, buildup of nitrogen, disease problems. So, you know, that's why I really, unless you've got the spacing and the ability to handle and spawn fish, it's very difficult to do this, but it is something that you can do as well, as long as you do have those, you know, those parameters that you can work with, and you've got some large enough facilities to handle this number of fish. But, you know, that's pretty much the dealings with the koi. Now, in the goldfishes, they can actually spawn a couple of times a year. So normally, the same process is going to happen. The females are going to lay a lot of eggs, and they can spawn 1 to 2 times a year. Males can fertilize, you know, more than one female batch of eggs. So the males are always there to take care of any females that are spawning. But in the same vein, if you've got koi mixed in them, then you're going to have a lot of those fish eggs that are going to get eaten by the koi themselves. So if you're trying to get the goldfish and just strictly goldfish to spawn, you probably want to either not have any koi in the pond at all, or either have some of this other plant material like we talked about that you can actually remove from the pond and either put in an aquarium or put in another nursery pond. But either way, you know, spawning a fish and having your own fish fry and babies is a hard thing to accomplish. It's just normally a matter of being able to, you know, follow these few little steps, and when you do get some spawns, you know how to properly handle those fish and take care of them. All right, the fish we're looking at now is a Japanese koi, and basically we're going to be discussing in this particular video, you know, the koi and a couple of varieties of goldfishes, because they're the most common fish that you do keep in your ornamental ponds. For a koi to be a true koi in a koi pond, they need a depth of 3 to 4 feet. But in an ornamental situation, you can keep koi and it's not a problem. It doesn't hurt them at all. They normally won't reach any more than 18 to 20 inches in length, but if you do have a true koi pond with that 3 to 4 foot of depth, you can get them up to 48 inches in length, and they're quite majestic and impressive when they get that large. There's over 250 different varieties of koi, different combinations of color patterns, different types of scale patterns. The distinguishing characteristic on the koi is they always have the barbels, which are the little whiskers that are under their chin. You can always tell a koi when he swims around in the pond, if you can see under his chin, those little whiskers that are extending out, which are called barbels, is the technical or the proper ichthyological name for the whiskers on the koi. Like I say, they can reach up to 48 inches in length, but in just an ornamental pool, they can be kept with other fish. They cohabitate well, so you can you can mix them in with any of your other goldfish varieties. As far as being able to sex the fish, this fish is probably close to be able to sex them. All right, you can see how I put my hand over his head. If you actually, it's just like a horse. If you take it and you cover their eyes, they don't seem to quite to fight quite as well. Of course, they cooperate differently, but you can actually put your hand over them and they'll get a little more calm. But what you can actually do is if you roll the fish over, you can actually see on the bottom of the fish the openings. All right, to actually sex a fish, this fish is fairly close to being able to sex and determine if it's a male or female. If you actually take a pencil, you can probe the vent openings, and a male will have 2 openings and a female will have 3. And sometimes the male will actually have a slight distension of one of those openings, which is called the papilla. So in some of the larger fish, you can actually see the male, and it's not the organ, it's just an extension of their second opening that can be called the papilla, and that's where the milk excretion occurs during spawning. But all in all, these fish are hardy. They can go through winter extremely well. They're easily kept in an ornamental pond situation. They make great pets. They can be easily trained to come up and eat out of your hands, and are just, you know, great pets to have. You'd just really be surprised how much you can become attached to a fish. It really seems silly, but they can turn out to be just like any other pet that you have. These 2 fish that we're looking at now are called shibunkin, and they're a variety of a goldfish. They come in a really a multitude of different colors. These 2 particularly just happen to have a lot of blue in the background, but you can find them with orange and red. Most of the time they're speckled. You can find different tail patterns. You can see how the one here on the left has a much prettier fan tail or a caudal tail on the fish themselves. The other fish is a little more plain in its finnage, but all in all, these are fish that do well in a pond. They can spawn in the pond, can spawn a couple of times a year, in fact. You know, they're a great pond fish, and they do well with all of the other varieties of fish. So a shibunkin is an excellent type of fish to have in your pond, and they're, you know, disease, hardy, cold weather. They're all good fish that do well with the other varieties. So it is an excellent choice, you know, for your pond. All right, what we have here are a couple of Sarasa comets. You know, just common comet variety of goldfish, but they're called Sarasa because of the red and the white coloration and patterns on the body, plus the fantails that they have. You can have regular comets, which are just solid red or gold. You can have just regular common Sarasas, and then you can have Sarasa fantails, which is what these are, and it's because of the fantail and the finnage on these fish. There again, a combination of these fish with shibunkin, with koi, with you know, those several varieties of fish. They do extremely well. You know, they play well together. They all get along, no problems with them. And these are one of my favorite fishes to put in the pond. They're not as susceptible to predation as some of the other fishes. I mean, because they do have an ability to move quite swiftly, so they can get out of the way of some birds or some other predators come near the pond. So, you know, I like these, you know, in combination with shibunkins and koi to go in the pond, as well as, you know, comets. All right, this is just a variety of a comet. There again, you can see there's a fantail comet that's in the back. You can see his tail is a little longer and more angelic. You've got a common comet here, which is just a plain tail, nothing real fancy about him. You know, of course, these are all just like the Sarasa comets. They're all the same variety. They've just been bred for a different color and pattern characteristics. All of these fish spawn, can do well in the pond, hardy as far as disease and temperature goes. So these are all great fish to have in your pond, and even to spawn if you want to try to get some offspring from these. The only fish that I really don't like to put and mix in together are some of the orphies. The golden orphies are more aggressive. They tend to battle it out with a lot of the other fish in the pond. They're extremely aggressive as far as their feeding characteristics go, so they don't do well as some of the what I call kind of bug-eyed Ryukins and other more of a tank type fish that don't seem to do as well. They seem to have more problems with those longer fantails and the eyes. That they have more of a disease problem. So I think as far as the fish that I have observed that seem to do better, you know, in a pond situation, all the Sarasa varieties, Shibunkin and Koi, you know, to me seem to really handle it and do the best. Hey folks, in this segment we're going to talk about health issues and what to do when your fish get sick. Most of the time when folks have sick fish, it's either either two factors. One, there's some type of parasite that's gotten on the fish, you know, either some type of protozoan parasite, some type of bacterial infection, you know, and normally fish have always got some type of parasites on their body. I mean, you very rarely find a fish that's 100% clean of any type of parasites at all. Normally these parasites only come into play and start causing the problem if the fish have been subjected to some type of stress. You know, say it's a new fish that you just brought from, you know, a nursery facility or some other hatchery facility. You know, if they didn't quarantine them, you know, that should be the first thing that you ask before you buy any fish. Have these fish been quarantined and treated for any diseases before they were actually put on the market to sell? If not, you know, you shouldn't buy those fish, or if you do, you should have your own quarantine facility. But if you know that you're getting some good, clean, healthy fish from a reputable fish supplier or aquatic nursery, you know, you can feel, you know, pretty confident that they're doing the right thing in the way of quarantining fish. But most of the time when people call in, they ask, you know, my fish are sick, I've lost a couple of fish, you know, what should I do? Well, the first thing that I'll always ask them to do, it's either water quality related or, like we just said earlier, some type of parasite problem, bacterial or a protozoan parasite. Without having to go into a lot of you know, try to find out the answer, long drawn out solution, and we need something immediate relief because we're having fatalities, I'll immediately tell the homeowner or the pond owner to do a 50% water change. And I mean, drop a pump in there, pump out 50% of the water, and then refill. But when you refill, certainly use a dechlorinator, but I like to use one of the dechlorinators that also has some type of a conditioner in with the dechlorinator. Not only does it neutralize any chlorine or heavy metals, but it also has, you know, like this particular one has, you know, like some aloe in it that helps condition the skin of the fish. All of fishes, goldfishes, koi, any fish variety has a slime coating that is a natural disease fighting mechanism as part of good fish health. If you catch a dry fish, something's wrong with that fish. It shouldn't be a dry, unslimy type of fish. That fish coating is a very viable function for that fish and the fish health itself. So you should always know that your fish should always have a good slime coating. If they don't, then you know you need to start looking at some type of disease problems or add one of the water conditioners that has something that will help facilitate slime coating. So I'll do that 50% water change. I'll go ahead and put in this dechlorinator with the stress coating to make sure that I'm getting this additional slime coating that will be produced. Once I get the water refilled, I'll come back in with some pond salts. Here again, we're going to do that water change just in case it's a water quality issue. You know, if we've got high nitrites or high ammonia, doing that 50% water change is going to give us some immediate relief. So we've done that 50% water change, then we come back in and we calculate the volume of water in the pond. And let's just say, for instance, we've got a 600-gallon pond. Well, a proper salt addition is 3 pounds per 100 gallons. So you can see if we've got 600 gallons in the pond, we've got them 3 times 6, so we're going to be putting 18 pounds of salt in this pond, which sounds like a tremendous amount of salt to be added to the pond, but you're going to break it up over a 3-day period. And another very important factor is this should be uniodized salt. Iodine is one of the nutrients that we add as a supplement for human health, but it's not necessary and could actually be harmful for the fish's health. So make sure that you get an uniodized variety of salt. So if you're having to put in 18 pounds in that pond volume, you're going to come in and add, 3 into 18, so you're going to put out about 5 1/4 pounds of salt the first day. You're going to wait 24 hours, put another 5 1/4, and then put the final 5 1/4 in the third day. Once you've got that in, you've roughly got about a 3% salt solution in the pond. It isn't harmful to the fish at all. And you could actually leave that in for an extended period of time, but if you've got any plant material in there at all, it can really be harmful to the fish. So you've got to do a 25% water change after that 4th day to help relieve that salt stress that will be on your plants. So if you do have plants, you do need to go ahead and do that 25% salt change, or water change. But what the salt does is it increases the slime coating. We talked about the stress coat and the need for the additional water conditioners and stress conditioners in it. The salt immediately allows those fish to build up a slime coating, and as you increase the amount of salt in the pond itself, you're also increasing the amount of osmotic potential within the fish themselves. Without getting into a whole lot of scientific mumbo jumbo here, basically what happens is we humans have trouble becoming dehydrated. Well, fish have problems with a overhydration in their body, so their body mechanisms continuously functions to push water out of their body rather than us humans trying to keep water in. So the fish are working at an entirely opposite osmotic potential as humans. So what this salt does, not only does it build up this slime coating and helps them to slough off any gill parasites that may have attached themselves to their gills or anything that's attached to their body, but it also allows them to build up an osmotic potential in their body that they're able to continuously be pushing this volume of water out of their gills, which is where they do all of their respiration and most of their fluid exchange. So as they're pushing all this out, they're also washing out and helping blow off any parasites that may have attached themselves to their gills. So that's where salt is a very important factor. And also the fact that salt also is toxic to some forms of parasites. So if you get some of the protozoan parasites, they aren't very tolerant of high salinity, and they can't reproduce very well in high salinity ponds. So it's an important factor as far as the sloughing of the parasites, as well as deterring any reproduction of the organisms themselves. Once we've started that salt solution, after that first day, if you see some open lesions or open wounds, that basically is going to tell you what you need to be treating for. There's several varieties of bacteria. There's some, like in the Aeromonas strain, that actually cause open lesions and sores. So if you actually see some open lesions and sores, that is going to tell you when you go to your aquatic nursery what particular antibiotics or what particular types of treatments you're going to need. There's a lot like an ick guard. It has an active ingredient of some of the parasiticides that help kill the parasites, but it also has some bacteria stat that is more effective in treating the bacteria that may be attached in some of these open lesions. I've even gone as far as, if there's some really bad sores, to actually net the fish up and have a bottle of iodine and take a cotton swab and actually, daub the wound with an iodine-soaked piece of cotton. Not only does this help keep out any fungal infection, it helps, it's helped the fish to fight off that fungus, but it also helps kill off some of the bacterial strains. Also, you get into it, and this is one more of the parasite guards. If you don't see any open lesions or wounds, a lot of times it can be some type of gill parasite that's actually just broken down and eaten a lot of the gill parasites, or that have attached themselves to the gills. So the parasite guard is something that's really good to break down and kill anything that is attached to the gills, as well as the Deciphin treatment here, which is good for ick, which is a common one. It's the little white specks, but also anything that attaches on the gills as well. Of course, all of these treatments, you should always read and follow the label directions. You got to calculate and know your pond volume, so you put in the appropriate mounts, and then treat on a staged basis, particularly on some of the ick guards, because they normally only kill the adult stage of the parasite. If you've got any larvae or any cysts that haven't morphized into adult organisms yet, a lot of these treatments won't kill the cysts. They've got an extremely hard shell around them, so that the chemical isn't able to penetrate it. So they've actually got to go through that life cycle and mature into an adult. So a lot of the ick guards, you have to come back in and treat 7 days, and then come in again in like 14 days and do a retreatment just to kill any eggs or any cysts that may have hatched out and now have formulated into some adults. There are some formula or some fungicide treatments that you see out there as well. Normally a fungicide is something that's a secondary infection. It usually follows a bacterial infection. When you get the open lesions and sores, then you have the fungus which will invade and attack the exposed sore, and that's usually not a primary source of a disease situation. Fungal, it can be a secondary or even a tertiary result of the disease itself. So, the fungals can come in and used at a point in time when you're actually starting to see some of those, but usually any of the disease treatments that treat the bacteria will also work as a fungicide as well. All right, we've gone through already 3 things that you should do. One is you want to do that 50% water change. Secondly, you want to start your salt treatment to the pond. Thirdly, you want to do some type of a chemical treatment for bacteria, fungus, and parasites. And then fourthly, your fish are stressed out. You've already lost a couple. They've got lesions and diseases. You've taken care of external bacteria and external or parasites. What you want to do now is get some medicated antibiotics in the fish themselves, and actually this is just 2 particular varieties of medicated food. And what I strongly advise is that you go ahead, and once you started these treatments and you've lost some fish already, normally they're not going to be very hungry. So you've already lost a couple of fish, they're already a little weak. Well, once you put the salt in, you're going to immediately see they're going to have a little bit more energy. I always tell everybody it equates you to being in the hospital and you're sick and you're dehydrated, and the first thing they do is basically pop an IV in your arm and get some fluids and get your electrolytes back in balance. Well, that's what happens when you put the salt in. Well, you perk the fish up when you put the salt in, because you notice that's usually the first thing is they've stopped feeding. So you start these other procedures, and then you want to come back in and start feeding with the medicated feed. Just like antibiotics, when the doctor prescribes an antibiotic to you, he says, hey, look, you take this until you've used up the whole prescription. You know, don't take it for 4 days and you start feeling better and quit taking it. Well, what happened is you're allowing these bacteria that have caused you to become sick in the first place to become acclimated to the type of antibiotic you've used, and if you don't fully take that whole prescription, you allow those bacteria a chance to become resistant to that particular antibiotic. Well, basically, that's the same thing that can happen when you feed these medicated fish foods. If you don't give these fish a minimum, and I'm talking about a minimum of 10 feedings, if you throw out a few pellets the first day and they don't eat it, don't count that as a feeding. You've got to make sure that these fish are taking this food in and ingesting it, and they get it in their digestive tract, and the antibiotics that are contained within this fish food is absorbed within the body tissues of the fish themselves, so that you go ahead and get a good internal antibiotic treatment on the fish. So if you come in and follow, you know, all 4 of these regimes, water change, salt treatment, you know, chemical treatment, and some type of medicated food treatment, most of the time you're going to be able to come in and take care of any type of disease problem without losing the whole lot of fish. The only thing to be concerned about that we can't do a thing about right now for the koi in particular is a viral disease, and up until now, you know, there aren't even any treatments for the viral disease. It basically has to run its course. For some deeper information about that, you can go to some of the websites, particularly koivet.com, and they give you some different treatment methods that you possibly can do if your koi have come down with the koi virus. But most of the problems that we deal with and that you're going to see in your pond and your everyday just pondering activities is just these simple bacteria or parasite problems, and if you follow these treatments, I think you're going to have some good results. All right, we discussed actually doing the water change and chemical treatments, but if you do pull a water check and you carry it down and you have it analyzed and you determine that you've got some type of water quality issues, either high ammonia or high nitrates, you know, these are some bacterial additives that you can put in your pond that'll certainly increase the microbial activity. Bacteria grow in logarithmic patterns, which means they go from 2 to 4 to 16, and they can actually reach such high population numbers that they'll actually crash. And a lot of times when people talk about their pond going through a bloom cycle with green water, that's probably what's happened, is these naturally occurring bacteria have reached such a high population level that they've actually crashed and allowed the nitrogen to be available for the algae to start growing. But in our case, if it's actually causing stress on the fish themselves, which is normally in the form of ammonia, you've got certain products like this Ammo Down, which is actually formulated just to strictly attack the ammonia. These other bacterial additives are more general nitrifying bacteria, kind of a balanced formula of naturally occurring bacteria that you actually want to use as supplements in your pond. But the most important thing to remember is if you do come back in and you've determined that this is a disease problem and you've gone ahead and you've used some of the other chemical treatments, you've essentially killed all the bacteria in the pond, good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria that were causing the disease problems. So once you've finished and completed these disease treatments with the chemical additives, you definitely need to come back in and reestablish your pond. Just follow the label directions, whatever the particular microbial additive that you're going to use, but you need to come back in and reestablish that biofiltration, because if you don't and you start feeding your fish on that higher feeding regime, you're going to start causing water quality problems. So just make this a really strong point that you know to come back in, and if you've done a chemical treatment, once those are completed, come back in and re-inoculate your pond with these good nitrifying bacteria. Hey folks, I hope you enjoyed the video and you certainly picked up some tips on maintaining fish for a healthy environment in your pond, as well as some tips for spawning and feeding of your fish. So thanks for joining.
There's water in the brook running down to the stream. There's a bullfrog on the bank, baby, singing songs to me. There's fish down underneath that water, baby, saying, oh man, you'll never catch me.